Hello, everyone. My name's Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Tonight, we're discussing The Innocents, the spellbinding 1961 screen version of Henry James's The Turn of the Screw. Producer-director Jack Clayton and cinematographer Freddie Francis conjure a haunting on-screen atmosphere with an eye for hypnotic, symbolic imagery where the sunlit scenes are frequently more chilling than those set at night. Truman Capote and William Archibald's screenplay also introduces layers of sexual frustration, repression, and hysteria, which, while eliminating none of the original story's ambiguity, supply an intriguing psychological angle that modern viewers will surely appreciate. As prim governess Miss Giddens, assigned to a country estate to care for two orphaned children, Deborah Kerr is undeniably the film's anchor, engine, and rudder. The six-time Oscar nominee's brilliant performance walks the tightrope between strength and fear, conviction and doubt. Pamela Franklin is terrific as the angelic Flora in her screen debut, displaying hints of the preternatural maturity that would show up again and again throughout her career. And as young Master Miles, Martin Stevens manages to top his captivating turn from the previous year's Village of the Damned, delivering a magnificently layered turn that flickers between childlike precociousness and a sinister, almost sexually predatory quality. One of the finest ghost stories ever committed to celluloid, The Innocents is often compared to Robert Wise's The Haunting, which came out 2 years later, 1963. Another stellar example of prolonged tension tempered with minimal special effects and deep, troubling, emotionally mature subject matter. The two films also share a common theme of lead female protagonists, utterly undone by their reactions to the mysteries around them, where we are never quite sure if what they see, and we through their eyes, is reality or fiction. But more than anything else, I love the children. We're going to be talking about The Innocents from 1961, celebrating its 65th anniversary, and we have an incredible panel to chat about with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Tyler Pistorius.
How's it going, everyone?
Nicola McCafferty.
I think I might get carried away too easily.
Mark Easted.
Hey, everybody. Super excited. This is one of my favorite horror movies ever.
Back in the doc's office after a long and much too long time, Kate Estrella.
Hi, I'm Kate. It's a pleasure to be a guest at Bly Manor.
And once again back, Michael Orlando Yacarino.
I've got my ghost viewers on.
And we're going to be chatting about The Innocents from 1961, celebrating its 65th anniversary, and we will be talking spoilers, so just prepare yourselves, everybody. Thanks for coming on the show, and welcome. I feel like I've just seen Michael, Mark, and Nicola recently, so it's nice to have you all back again, and we're just going to be talking about the one movie this time, and that is The Innocents. And Mark, as you mentioned, it is also one of my favorite movies. We included in our first book, Horror 101. Another frequent guest, George Dodako, did the essay for that one. Mark, well, how'd you come to that one for the first time?
Honestly, don't remember.
That's a terrible story.
Yeah, I know. Sometime in the 90s, as I was trying to, fill in some of the horror movie blanks in my viewings, I'd read about it or heard about it somewhere, got the DVD, loved it. It has one of the probably like top 3 scares, like chilling scenes for me in like any movie I've ever seen. Loved it ever since.
Let's bounce up to Nicola. How about you? How'd you come to this one?
Also not a great story. I watched it at some point, I want to say in like 2020 or 2021. And unfortunately I had seen, I read the novella in high school, but I had seen the Mackenzie Davis adaptation prior to seeing this, the Turning, I think that one's called. I watched this with my ex and we loved it.
That wasn't a bad story. That was pretty good. Tyler, how about you? Welcome back.
Thank you so much. This was probably had to be back in 2008. I had come across a list that was by Martin Scorsese, where he talks about some of his favorite horror films, and he listed The Innocents as one of them. So I tracked it down from Dollar Video because I was going to school in DeKalb at the time. Watched it. Absolutely loved it. It scared the hell out of me. I had nightmares about that movie for about a month straight. Years later, when it was announced that it was coming to Criterion, I went and got the Blu-ray, which I have in my hand right here. Actually, just watched it recently again because I've watched this movie a number of times, and I've shown it to a lot of people. In fact, I've got this movie group with the mutual on this podcast with Mackenzie Parker. We're called the Huskies, and we had our 100th screening in October, and the horror film of choice that night was The Innocents.
Excellent.
So I adore this. It's been a part of my life for so long.
And Michael, how about you?
I've been watching this film probably for the past 40 to 50 years and consider it one of the landmark films of any genre, but certainly of the horror genre of the 20th century.
And Kate, I'm always glad to have you in. Seems like we gravitate toward the literary ones. So very excited to hear how you came to this one. If you came to the novella first, what came first and how did you come to it?
Yeah, I read The Turn of the Screw by Henry James in college as an undergrad, and I think we were shown clips of The Innocents, but I hadn't seen it in full until last year. I saw it as part of the Conjuring Nosferatu series curated by Robert Eggers at Lincoln Center, which, just like films, there were a couple of really great ones. And so I'm very glad to have seen it on a gorgeous large screen because I watched it again via a YouTube link for this podcast. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, this is one that I had heard about for years through various reference books and things like that. And as is often the case, you wonder if it's going to live up to its reputation. And sitting down with The Innocents was akin to sitting down to The Haunting. It's one of the most amazing ghost stories to me, and just a gorgeous film. Like Jack Clayton and Freddie Francis collaborating, creating such incredible visuals. And then you have that amazing cast. Deborah Kerr as our center, Pamela Franklin and Martin Stevens as our two children are just brilliant. An extraordinary film. And going back and reading the novella, it's a wonderful adaptation in that it is as ambiguous as the novella is. Kate, if you don't mind, I'll throw it to you because you are our literary person. The origins of the novella, Henry James's story, it was seen pretty much straight ahead as a ghost story when it first came out. And I think it wasn't until later that it was kind of reassessed as perhaps there was something psychological going on. What are your thoughts on that?
It's sort of a Gothic tale, and there is that ghost story tradition. Henry James is an American, but kind of decamped, back to live in England and kind of saw himself as a citizen of Britain. So I feel that it's really in line with that ghost story literary tradition. Edith Wharton, a contemporary of James, we were friends, also writing banger ghost stories at the time. And since that time, the edition that I have that is actually my, we keep circling back to literary things because I did study English literature as an undergrad and also work in publishing and work as a librarian. So this is my undergraduate copy for the visual portion of the podcast, but there's some amazing essays in here. There's a way to read the story and the film as well through a Marxist lens, psychoanalytic lens, feminist. There is a lot, and I think that's, true of our beloved genre, of course, and the reflective surfaces in the film and the doubling and the Gothic, that it is reflective of our reality and our deepest, darkest fears. But yeah, the governess as a Gothic trope and a character in particular totally stands out in this story, and this is illustrative of that literary legacy that Jane Eyre is a part of as well. This figure comes into the home who is of a different class, usually a class beneath, working class, to instruct the children. And so there's this tension that she's meant to be reinscribing particular values, instructing them in particular kinds of education, whether that's womanhood, for Flora, or, sort of acting as a tutor, even though she doesn't really do that with Miles. There's an anxiety that because she is not really of this class, that she's not, and which is true of the time as well, not just in the fiction of the time, but an actual anxiety in the Victorian era. So that's my little tiny, super fast intro, I guess.
What are people's thoughts about the literary origins and the ambiguity? Mark, would you go ahead and lead into that?
Yeah. And it was actually, Kate talking about college did remind me where I first saw it. And it was in college. I had a From Fiction to Cinema class where you would read the book and then watch the movie and compare, contrast. Another literary connection is that the script is really written by Truman Capote for the most part. So it kind of has a sort of a literary pedigree, even in the script. I like the ambiguity. When I first saw it, I probably didn't like that as much, being a young person thinking more black and white. And, now I'm okay with living in that. And this time through, actually reading a few things, I saw another way that you could interpret this besides, is it real or is it ghosts? Is it her head or is it ghosts? The other one is that it's kind of a prefiguring of the others and that they're all dead. The whole movie. And there are quite a few clues that pop up throughout the movie that could lend to that interpretation that they're kind of in a limbo or something like that. But I think I'm not always a fan of ambiguity in movies, because most of the time I find it's just like the writer, they just couldn't bring it home. So they left it vague. I was like, you just didn't have answers here. But, ambiguity has to be intriguing. It has to be a mystery that makes sense, where you can go out and you could say, here's my evidence for my viewpoint. And the other person could say, here's my evidence. And they both seem pretty valid, but we don't know. Kind of like the ending of The Thing.
Yeah.
Which is it? But that's part of the magic of the movie. And in this case, they definitely did it right, I thought.
Well, Michael, you and I just talked about Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which is very much kind of an unreliable narrator, or at least it can be. Right. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I mean, in terms of the film, it is just in the similar way of Let's Scare Jessica to Death. It is bookended with images of the governess. So there is a very strong argument that everything we're seeing is through her perception. Talking about the literary origins of it, I mean, when it did come out, my understanding, it was published in Collier's magazine, and when it was first published, there was a little bit of a backlash because of the very uncomfortable sexual overtones of the story. James may have gotten scared off by that, so there are a number of stories where, I mean, he almost dismissed it, going, "Oh, it's an amusette," and I heard this story from the Archbishop of Canterbury, who, by the way, was E.F. Benson's father, even though E.F. Benson says he has no recollection of that. So there is a theory that because of the mild backlash against the story, that James got a little scared off by it. Going forward, of course, I don't know if we're going to be talking about this, but there was a 1950 William Archibald play that is based on James's novella, which then led to the Benjamin Britten opera, which led to the film. So there's a long lineage through that. At some point, we will have to talk about the sexual through line of all of those connected creators. But certainly, going back to what Mark said, it is amazing that when and I did reread the novella and actually listen to an audio earlier today as well, to compare and contrast again. And it is so artfully done. The original novella, the Britten opera, the film, less so in the Archibald play, but that there are such strong arguments that you could go either way. No one clearly, and famously, Deborah Kerr did report, and where she finally confronted Clayton, said, "What's the deal here?" He said to her, "You need to keep both available. You need to make both interpretations available." He wouldn't adhere to whether they were real or not, the ghosts.
Right.
And Kerr did try to play it that way, and which is masterful, and it works.
William Archibald, when he did the stage adaptation, he did very much lean toward it being, these were ghosts.
Yes.
And that's why Jack Clayton was a little disappointed in the screenplay, and that's why he brought in Capote, because he wanted to bring back that ambiguity that he felt was missing from the Henry James novel. Tyler, curious to hear your thoughts. Where do you sit? Are they real or are they not?
Oh, I think it could go either way. I mean, sometimes it just depends on what mood I'm in. When I just watched it recently, I just kind of was starting to look at it just at pure face value, just ignoring the presence of ghosts and everything, and just putting it in a frame of mind where it's just all completely in her head. And also it made for a much more horrifying experience by the implications at the end of it.
Yeah.
Especially when talking about the psychosexual nature of it. And yeah, it shocked me the first time, that ending, and every time I watch it, it gets uncomfortable every single time. Other things that I just keep coming back to with this, because I have not read the book or the play for this yet. Regretfully, I will get on that. My apologies. So, but just speaking of the movie, purely for me, just at this moment, what I think of is just how the movie just feels like it's painted with silver. Just of how beautiful and immersive and inviting it is to get to the house of horrors. And even though every time you know that things are going to go the way that they go, it still has that bright, bright light music that you often hear in Disney films, which is crazy to hear.
Yeah.
That kind of vibe, especially going into the house. And again, with Deborah Kerr's performance in it, I do think it might be the best of her entire career. I know some critics have said that. I think I have to agree.
Nicola, how about you?
Yeah, I did not get a chance to reread, so I'm operating off of my like high school understanding. But I did also want to do a show and tell because I have a very cute Dell trade paperback. But I think that listening to everyone talk about the ambiguity, something that I'm really struck by, and was thinking about while watching it, is Miss Giddens is just so invested in seeing the patterns, reading the signs, like everything for her becomes proof of the presence of these ghosts that are trying to corrupt the children. And I think the kind of co-presence of these multiple different interpretations invites us as viewers and as readers to be doing the same thing. So we're kind of enacting, like, while watching it, the same kind of like paranoia where it's like, is this real? Is this not real? Also, like, what's my narrative and how does everything that I'm seeing fit into that narrative? So I think that that's a really interesting aspect of it too. And, just the way that like the really deep focus shots kind of invite us to take in the whole entire frame, make us think about like what's going on in the background. Like, is there something there that we didn't see? And I think it lends itself, the paranoid nature of the story really lends itself to cinematic adaptation, also because it's kind of thinking about like, the cinema itself allows us to see and imagine things that aren't really there. So I think it's like perfect for a story like this, especially, at this time period and working with the Gothic tradition.
Mark, you mentioning like watching it as a kid. I mean, that's, I think when I first saw it, because we're horror fans, the idea of accepting the ghosts makes absolute sense. I'm like, of course they are ghosts. We see them. She sees them, therefore they are there. And it was only later as I started to realize, yes, it also could just be through her lens. I love the fact that when she sees the ghosts, it's not like a big jump scare. Rarely are they jump scares. They are just kind of matter of fact. And that's not something you usually see in a horror film. Usually the ghosts are presented in a scary fashion. Not to say that there aren't moments where Peter Quint is, genuinely terrifying, coming in through the greenhouse window. But when we first see him up on the high parapet, he's just a person, or at least seems to be just a person. And Miss Jessel, sitting at the desk or on the reeds, they seem to be so real. And because Deborah Kerr is so relatable and we are so invested, we genuinely care about her, I think we are inclined to believe her. And so also, you have those strengths. That's why I wanted to talk about what, whether people thought they were real or not. We have our housekeeper, Mrs. Gross, and she's kind of the weird one, because when Mrs. Giddens describes the visions, Mrs. Gross is able to identify who these people are. Again, that could all be in Mrs. Giddens' mind. But again, as the stories we're watching it, we're like, that's proof positive. The fact that you can say this person looked like this, and you know who that person is. Those are some of the things that just came up for me and continue to come up for me as I was watching. I texted Nicola earlier this week and I said, I'm not sure how much I have to say about this movie, except for when I watch it, I know that I'm in the presence of greatness. It just seems like everything is operating exactly as it should and leaving you wondering. We'll talk more about the ending in a minute, but that ending is so shocking and so surprising. I know those are similar, but they're different. The fact that you are left with the death of a child, but it's inexplicable. How did Miles die? And we don't know based on what we see.
There was an interview with Truman Capote where, he generally, I think he liked the script he wrote, but he felt the one mistake he wrote and he wished he hadn't put in was when Miss Giddens feels the tear of Miss Jessel on the desk. He felt it made it too real.
Too tactile.
I don't agree because, again, if we're seeing it from her perspective and she's the only one in the room, it still doesn't have to be there. But he felt like, yes, it kind of maybe stepped a little bit too much into one side or the other.
I mean, I've certainly had dreams that, in which I could taste and touch and things like that. So you have that experience, or at least you have your mind has that experience.
Right.
First and foremost, let's talk about Deborah Kerr's performance. She is a 6-time Oscar nominee, so she knows her way around a line or two. What are some of the things that, like, when we picture that performance, what are the moments that come to mind?
Oh, for me, just going down the hallway, even just sitting in the carriage, just going into it, and her interactions with the children, I could just go from beginning to end. She was one of those actresses whose performances could transcend through even the form and fashion of acting as it was transitioning from how things used to be done in film before the actor studio came in and kind of took over during Hollywood in the 1950s. That performance still manages to age perfectly well over time. How she managed to sell all the horror of it all and be completely convincing, and you're just completely with her, and it doesn't matter if she's gone nuts or not. Like, you're completely with her throughout all of this. I don't know how she did it. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think something I'm really struck by, like in tandem with her phenomenal performance, is the way that the lighting is sort of playing with her. She's always sort of like shrouded in this like angelic halo light, but it moves around to different characters. And at first, I mean, it's, another sort of like symptom of the ambiguity of the film. But at first you think, okay, so she's got the righteous light of God shining upon her, but we see it with Miss Gross, we see it with Flora, we see it with Miles. And again, if we're thinking about this, like from her perspective, it's like, she's endowing all of them with goodness from the beginning, but it takes on this like ironic characterization as the film progresses to where she's still, ensconced in the light of the truth, because this is a movie like so invested in, both truth and imagination together. She's utterly convinced of her own righteousness at the expense of everybody else. Her kind of progressively more wide-eyed performance, and, what Kate and I would refer to in the words of Lana Del Rey, tearing around in her fucking nightgown, it's just like, so it's so compelling to watch. But I think it works really well with the cinematography to sort of like both the performance and the lighting like inflect each other in ways that just amplify everything that we've already been talking about in terms of the ambiguity. And to have a performance that changes the way that we view the lighting, I think is something really special.
I couldn't agree more. That's actually something I hadn't thought about, like how that performance and the cinematography really play hand in hand. Speaking of hand in hand, I mean, that's how the movie starts, is that angelic, the righteousness. Yeah, it's extraordinary. Michael, how about you? Some thoughts on Deborah Kerr?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at her career historically at what time this film was made. She was the perfect English Rose. She was trying to break out of that. I mean, From Here to Eternity, in which she plays a nymphomaniac alcoholic. I mean, she was making an effort to break that role, that perception of her. As many times as I see this film, it's staggering to me that someone of that magnitude would take this risk. The two scenes, the kissing scenes, the one in Miles' bed, and the one at the end of the film are still absolutely shocking. She was way too old for the role. The character is supposed to be about 20. She was nearly 40. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. And the gravitas she brings to it sells us completely. You know, the whole notion of her being this vicar's daughter who is gotten herself way in over her head. I mean, she clearly says in the novella and in the film, she really has no experience in what she's doing. For Deborah Kerr to be able to progressively throughout the course of the film, without becoming hysterically ridiculous, is an amazing performance to watch, that we are brought along with her every step of the way. And we're so taken with her, and she's so likable that we go along with her on this ride. And then there's those moments where you start questioning, I don't know if I like this woman anymore. And in a similar way, I mean, I think of it as Angela Lansbury in The Manchurian Candidate. I had a fantasy of doing a bizarre Victorian erotica fan fiction in which, you know, you have Anna having been subjected to whatever in the King of Siam's boudoir, has now ended up becoming a governess who's been derailed, and now she's taking care of these children. And in the same way, we have little Pamela Franklin starting out as Flora, although the timing wouldn't work. She eventually becomes Florence Tanner in The Legend of Hell House.
Yep.
Because of all of her experience with ghosts. So anyway, that's just my twisted mind. But it's a remarkable performance, and it's a lamb. And she considered it two things. Number one, she considered it personally as her best work. And number two, openly expressed her displeasure at the fact that not only her performance, but Jack Clayton and Freddie Francis did not get the recognition they should have for this work. She considered it a masterwork for herself and for everyone involved.
Just listening to you talk about like the age factor and the fact that it's Deborah Kerr. I think that's another thing, is that this is a major star at this point, and it reminds me of Gregory Peck's presence in The Omen, where because it's Gregory Peck, we buy into this fantasy. And I think there's something about Deborah Kerr's presence that we're like, not only is she older, you know, so she's not some flighty 20-year-old. She is somebody who's mature and has the best of intentions, speaks very kindly, and is so taken with the children. Of course, she's going to treat them to the best of her abilities. And I think that's something that we go, and that takes us right along for the ride, is that we're absolutely on her side.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like her performance is so much in the eyes, you know, and so much of this film is about what is visible, what is invisible, what is reflected, what is not, and just, you know, those sort of like close frame, you know, that kisses too, of just her conflict, you know, the eyes darting back and forth and trying to compel, you know, the children to see with those like really wild eyes, is something that I was focused on, in addition to what Nicola was saying about the angelic light, and that she is so overtaken and she herself possessed with this desire to help the children. And she says at one point, one of the lines is like, and sort of masterfully in her, you know, Deborah Kerr way, it kind of goes really quickly. It's like, you know, even I want to help people, she says, even if it hurts them. Like it's so just a part of her belief system that it almost gets lost. Her conflating and the people around her is conflating with what is imagination and what is truth and what is seen and what do you badly want to see, or you want to be true, or you would pretend to not see. And it's all right there on her face the whole time.
This time around, thinking about the fact that she was 39 and not 20, I think plays into the ambiguity really well. And it heightens all of the psychosexual and other things. But it also made me think, you know, that obviously we're talking about generally that the innocents are the kids. But is it her? You know, she's almost 40 and she has experienced nothing of the world. She's a parson's daughter who's not married, has no family, hasn't done anything. So she kind of arrives as an innocent, but at that age, you should not be innocent. You should know things. You should have experienced things. And the fact that she hasn't, I think kind of twists some of her desires up. And that's where you get some of these issues. They feel even more heightened that it's someone in their 30s and not someone who's just out of their teens who might have these weird feelings about a kid and what it means. So sometimes I feel like her performance is overheated, but in a good way. Like it needed to be because she's kind of like this innocent person, even though really, again, she shouldn't be an innocent person, but she kind of is in the sense of the word where she just doesn't know stuff.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Let's talk about the kids, because that sense of them being innocent, Miles has clearly done something at school to get sent home. Mrs. Giddens does not want to believe it because he seems like such a perfect angel. But Martin Stevenson's performance is kind of so mature and so, mannered that you have to wonder what exactly he did. And I think that's kind of the wonderful mystery that we have with both the children. Let's talk about the kids. Like, do we think that they are innocent? Do we think that they are possessed? What are our thoughts on these two children?
Well, going back to the ambiguity, I mean, there was a very famous essay written in the 1930s by Edmund Wilson that really affected Jack Clayton. What we have to realize historically and why the story made waves when it was originally published, we're coming out of the Victorian period. And at that time, children were not sexualized. They were not viewed as having any form of sexual inner life. In the wake of Freud, a lot of that started changing. Mm-hmm. And Edmund Wilson's analysis of James's novella, some consider it a little heavy-handed in terms of its talking about the phallic tower and that Miss Jessel is associated with water, that these things are just true. But it is absolutely undeniable that there is a very strong sexual element throughout the film. It can be, and in the novella, it could be read either way. Are these children corrupted? Were they corrupted? Were they somehow sexually abused in some way? I don't think there's enough evidence in the novella, in the film, in the play, in the opera that would definitively say that. And how much of that is coming through, once again, the character of, in the original novella, she's unnamed. She started to be called Miss Giddens in the Archibald play, which was carried over into the film, of course. And how much of this is her own repression? How much of this is her projecting sexuality or sexual misbehavior on these children, when even going back to what you said, Dr. AC, about why Miles is sent home, there really is no other evidence about what he actually did or didn't do. Right. And even if you take what he says in the film, I used to say things to some of the, I mean, yes, this is what children do. So there really is no firm evidence of any kind of them being truly corrupted in any way. I mean, the only other comment I would make is that, in my own personal opinion of children in film, I usually adhere to the Victorian proverb. What does that go? Children should be eaten and not ever listened to. Children should be... I don't like children in film, typically. And I find them extremely irritating because they act. Pamela Franklin, this was her first acting role, which is beyond remarkable. Both children were actually 11 years old. They were the same age in real life. They both do play younger, which it makes it more effective. Pamela Franklin had studied as a dancer, which of course is brought into the film. But this was her first role. Martin Stevens, by this time, was a veteran. He had done Village of the Damned. And he had done a film in which he actually plays Deborah Kerr's son prior to this. So he was a veteran. Both of their performances are absolutely remarkable. Both Stevens and Franklin both addressed as adults that during the making of the film, the script was kept back from them, that Clayton just wanted them to be children. That's it.
I agree. It's, especially for kids' performances, and especially for kids' performances from movies like going into the 60s and back. Oftentimes they're just cute, and it seems like they're reading their lines a lot of times in movies back then. I'm assuming the novella too, but this film kind of are looking at the idea of that Victorian idea, though, of like kids being angels. They're just pure. They know nothing. They have no urges. They have no physical urges, whether they're sexual or not. Like kids are so pure. And no, they're not. They're kids. They're people. But both Miss Gross and Miss Giddens see them in that light, though. Like they're these pure things, and we have to save them. So it gives you that, like, I don't know what to think. Are these bad kids? Are they? But no, they're just, they're whispering, but we don't know what they're saying. Like there's all these pieces of it that happen, and they give some of those, like right when towards the beginning, just offhand, Flora says, "Oh, look at that beautiful spider. Oh, look, and it's eating a butterfly." And it's just like, what? Like, and you're like, but a kid can say that and it mean nothing. They just noticed it, and it was cool to them. And I feel, especially this time watching it, that Miles at the end, when they're in the greenhouse, and she's trying to get him to admit what he did, and he's obviously ashamed of whatever happened because he was shamed for it. We don't know what it was, so we don't know if he should have been shamed or not, but he was shamed. And so I almost felt like he wanted to buy into her story, because then it would let him off the hook. If it was Quint, influencing me or doing then I'm not so bad. And that's why he maybe finally gives in and shouts out his name. Like she knows who he's trying to get her to say, even though obviously he doesn't really see him. But he wants to, maybe because like, I want to be okay. I don't want to be a bad kid, but we don't know if he's a bad kid because we don't know what he said or what he did. So it all the way through, again, it leaves it ambiguous, even like, are the kids even doing anything that's wrong? Or is it just her interpreting things through that lens of they should be these pure angels and they're not, so it means something has to be wrong here. The devil has to be in them.
Also, just call back to something that Mark had said earlier, which is just kind of about Miss our governess's innocence or not. There is a little bit of a hint, and this I think parallels kind of, we don't get to really understand what Miles did wrong at school, other than he said things in the original story. He said things to those he liked, which is perhaps significant if we want to get into Henry James's possible sexuality or not, what that, if there's a sort of queer reading of that is perhaps what he got in trouble for. But Miss Giddens herself says something, Nicholas, I got carried away. Oh, I got carried away. I think she says in London. So I think she actually has seen, some of the world, and she's starting out rather late as a governess, which would, I think, lead us to believe that she herself is no angel necessarily either. And I think that the kids, they're possessed by something. I think that they're possessed. I don't know if it's ghosts, but it's certainly the past. And I think part of this tension is they're not necessarily aware of it or intending some kind of malice, which is what Miss Giddens is trying to like make them see. Like she wants them to acknowledge, these figures that legitimately, historically, like that bad things happened at Bly Manor, which for all the world looks like a gorgeous Eden, that there is this dark past. Their language in particular, at some point Miles, I think, calls her toward the end a damned hussy. And also the way that Mrs. Gross reiterates some things that Flora said, horrors that you wouldn't believe a child to say. And where did she learn that? The implication being like, Miss Giddens would be like, well, I'm sure Miss Jessel, but perhaps it's like, well, Mrs. Gross saying, did she hear it from you? Like, the children are conduits and vessels, right, for the larger forces, the larger evil forces that are at work, whether they're ghosts or, the sort of trauma of their past, the isolation of the experience, this total insular world that is perhaps driving everybody all a little crazy. But I think for my part, it's like, how much, I don't know if it matters to me, like, oh, how much is this in the realm of like normal kid behavior, as just like, oh, let's look to the forces that are like acting through them, because I do think that they are doing some troublesome, and eerie things, even the way that they sort of talk like little adults, right? And that is certainly carried over from the original story. They call her dear,
right.
as they even though they themselves are meant to be children, they use that diminutive constantly, and I think like scathing effect often. Even just the things that they're aware of, at one point, I think Miss Giddens is complimenting Flora on her art, and Miles says something just so cutting, which is like, well, don't lie, don't lie to her. She's just, you're being nice, what am I meant to be like when I grow up? And I think that is also some of the anxiety, like what is their fate really? Like what is going to happen to them? And I think that they're sort of dimly aware of that and afraid because they don't have a real caretaker is their actual situation. And they're growing up and becoming aware of that. The kids are not all right, is what I'm saying.
Nicola.
I mean, Kate just like ignited a million thoughts in my head, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to say all of them or parse all of them. But to the origin of what Kate was saying, she has that encounter with the uncle at the beginning, which I think is like a key to so much that happens. But she says to Mrs. Gross that she got carried away too easily by the master, is what she said. But that also like, parallels in when she's alone with Miles at the end of the film and he's saying he's the master of the house now. Like that's kind of an echo of that earlier scene. But I think there's also, to Kate's original point about the kind of class dynamics here, there's like a way in which innocent is being used to talk about like knowledge, like in terms of education and in terms of class. So it's kind of working on those like dual valences because I'm fairly certain Miss Giddens also refers to Mrs. Gross at some point as an innocent. Like toward the end of the film, she said like, you were an innocent as well. And I think when she says it there, what she means is like, Mrs. Gross can't read. And that's like part of how all of this kind of like unfolds is that, she doesn't have access to the same information that Miss Giddens does. And there are all these shots too of the two of them like kind of trading places or like their faces superimposed on one another where you kind of like get the impression that Miss Giddens is like leading her through this like labyrinth of her own mind. But like in terms of, knowing and innocence, like how they interact with one another, like as Kate was saying, like the kids know things, like they know things about sexuality, but they also just like know things that they shouldn't, that there's no real like earthly reason for them to have access to that kind of information. And again, towards the end, Miles says he's not a mind reader, but he can sense things. There's that valence that innocence is also operating on. But another thing that we might think about as like, I don't know, a parallel sort of between Miss Giddens and between Miles, like when he is to return home, she says something, I think, from the letter about like contamination, that he was like contaminating the other children. That's like part of the justification for his return. And she's of course like appalled by this because, what could a little innocent child be doing that would be that kind of transgression? But I think there's also like a sexual connotation there, like corruption and contamination, I think are two of the words she uses. But also, like, if we think about who's, you know, the presence of a new person is that contaminating factor. Like who's the new person to this scene who's like really, you know, potentially the contaminant, again, like Kate was saying with, you know, towards the end with Flora's like foul language, like where did she learn that from? Who is the source of the contamination, and who's really innocent is like, and who knows what? And, you know, there are just all of these questions kind of bound up in the question of the children's innocence.
Well, and as we continue to talk about the title, I mean, there's also just the sense of someone who is guilty versus someone who is innocent. And, you know, a lot of crimes are being committed here. And we hear that, you know, we hear things that Peter Quint did and that Miss Jessel did and that Miles did and that perhaps, you know, Miss Giddens is responsible for. There is something about putting it out there as these are the innocents. And then you have to realize that perhaps that's not true. Perhaps that's not true at all, that perhaps everybody here is guilty on some level. I mean, the uncle, you know, is absolutely guilty of neglect. He uses his privilege to just ignore the situation and puts a responsibility onto Miss Giddens that she can then abuse. You know, she's able to send Miss Gross away. She's able to send Flora away and leave her alone with Miles, which is what brings about Miles's fate. It's just something as we continue to talk about this movie, things are firing for me that I hadn't thought about before. Tyler, sorry, swing back to you.
Regarding the kids, I love the performances in there, but I got to say with Miles, and it's not his fault, but there are times where I do think Miles is kind of a little shit. But again, not really his fault. I think it's more a byproduct of just how neglected he's been as a child, because that's not his fault necessarily that he's behaving the way he is. It's just not really getting much discipline. That's sort of my theory on it. I mean, especially, I think, in large part because of the uncle's neglect of it. I mean, especially when the uncle says straightly, no room mentally or emotionally for his niece and nephew, which I think is horrible. I'm sorry to say, they are your responsibility, especially if you can financially afford it, which he totally could, no less. So I think that contributes a great deal to where Miles and Flora are at early developmentally, and then just with the presence of the ghost of Peter Quint there just doesn't help things. Yeah,
the privilege and the isolation is definitely formative for both of them. The cruelty of children, you know, the fact that they don't have a filter, and so they're genuinely curious about things, and because no one has been there to truly guide them, we get the sense that baby Peter Quint has been an influence, and Peter Quint may have been sharing things that just continue to spark things for them. I think that's another element, is that he could have just been another human being, you know, who had experience in life, shared it with kids who don't understand the context for the things he's talking about, this relationship that he and Miss Jessel had. There's just all sorts of things that I go, these kids. And also, we just know that some kids are just a little scary. They will do things that are either coming from a place of innocence and curiosity, or they're just experimenting and acting out. I have a deep fear of children to begin with. These children are kind of in a position that they're untouchable. I mean, the answer to Miles for the school is just to send him away, right? There's no one actually instructing.
Yeah, and I think Miles, the only interaction they've had with other kids is the short time Miles is at school.
Right.
And no wonder he got in trouble, because they don't know how to act around other kids.
That's right.
And no wonder they speak like adults, because they've only been around adults who obviously, again, don't have limits. Like you said, they're not guiding them. They're just there taking care of their, you know, make sure they're clothed and fed. And they're witnessing stuff that's adult. And, you know, so it's no wonder in some ways that they can talk like adults, because that's all they've done. You know, they've not had a chance to socialize with peers.
Right.
I mean, there is that, going back to what Mark said, I mean, there is that moment in the final scene, preceding the final scene, where Miss Giddens says to Miles, you're just like any other normal boy. And he confronts her and says, if that was the case, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
And the other moment that really stuck out to me this time, just as Mrs. Gross and Flora are leaving the house in the carriage, Miss Giddens turns to Mrs. Gross and says something on the order of, please give Flora my love. And there's a pause, and she says, when she gets better. And then that scene is followed by a shot of Flora in profile in the carriage and Mrs. Gross sitting next to her. And it is obvious that Flora is now shell-shocked. And it's not hard to believe she's never going to get better. A lot of this goes back to which I mentioned earlier, as we get to know Miss Giddens towards the end of the film. There's a completely very unattractive and actually ugly aspect of her, where she is the classic missionary's daughter. You are going to tell everyone what is right and what is wrong. And I think Kate said there was that comment that she makes, sometimes I do things to help people that are going to hurt them. So by the end of the film, she's completely convinced and imperious. There is an absolute thread here of colonialism, imperialism. I mean, all of that is here, the whole class struggle. And by the end of the film, she's telling everyone what to do. And where she was very much of a compatriot with Mrs. Gross, by the end of it, she's pointing out, she's putting Mrs. Gross in her place. So, and all of this, of course, I don't want to get off the topic, filters down to the children and what is going to become of them. This is a very dysfunctional society. And these children, unfortunately, are the result of that in a very bad way.
Thanks, Michael, for also pointing out those, other larger political forces that are certainly acting through. And just something that I think about a lot, Wuthering Heights is out in the world, and the doomed narrative, like you're doomed to repeat, in some of these Gothic stories, and just what does it mean to be stuck in a loop and to be doubling and redoubling, and these children acting out the desires of those who are no longer alive, who's like Mrs. Gross keeps saying, like, well, I don't want to tell tales, they're dead, they're not here, but they are, the sort of those things, the ghosts of the past, colonialism, like they're always with us, they're always haunting the house.
Why do we think Miss Giddens latches on to Miss Jessel and Peter Quint as kind of the specters, if we're taking it from her standpoint of that she's the one imagining all of that?
I guess for me, because she's been so isolated all the way up until this time, and then she's even more isolated, it's just the open opportunity to open up so many things that were just inside of her that had never been expressed before.
Well, I mean, believe me, if Peter Quint came to me in the form of Peter Wingard, I'd be up in that goddamn tower shoveling the pigeon poop. I mean, there's an absolute sexual attraction to what is going on between these two individuals. When they were working on the script before Capote really took it over, and they tried to adapt the Archibald play, which is it's not terrible. It's weak, but it's not terrible. And they brought in the barrister turned author John Mortimer, who ultimately became most famous for Rumpole of the Bailey. One of the lines that Mortimer contributed to the script, which survives in the script, is the wonderful line Mrs. Gross says when she's describing Peter Quint and Miss Jessel. It was more like two animals tearing each other to pieces. Love, I suppose that's what she called it. Rooms used by daylight as if they were dark woods. Now, to a sexually repressed vicar's daughter, her imagination is going to be fueled. So I think there's an absolute fascination by the governess about these two figures and what did they do? And of course, over the course of the film, Miss Giddens becomes Miss Jessel and Miles becomes Peter Quint. And there's a wonderful line, it's very disturbing, in the James novella, where when they're doing that final scene, the confrontation between Miles and the unnamed governess, and they are finally alone, James actually describes it as being the awkward silence that a newlywed couple would experience on their honeymoon before retiring for the evening, where the waiter at the restaurant leaves them alone and they're both embarrassed. So there's this absolute sexual dynamic going on, and it's very uncomfortable. And in the film, if you focus on Deborah Kerr's performance, it is obvious that she is romantically smitten with Miles. It is undeniable. And that's just not my twisted mind. I mean, it's genuinely there. If you were to take out Martin Stevens and put, oh, by the way, Cary Grant was approached to play the uncle, but Mr. Grant said, I'll only do it if you get the uncle to come back at the end. And Clayton said, forget that. But anyway, if you were to replace Miles in the film with Cary Grant, let's say, Deborah Kerr wouldn't have to change her performance very much. She's playing it as if she is, as the film continues on, she's obviously romantically in some way attracted by him.
I think we also have, like visual evidence of the Jessel Giddens. Like we talked earlier about when she sees Miss Jessel crying at the desk. But then, the next shot after she's watching Miss Jessel, cry about her lover, when Miss Gross comes in, then who's sitting at that desk? It's Miss Giddens. So I think, the film, also visually cues us into that kind of substitution that's happening between the two of them. And I think also, one of the points in favor of this is all in her head in some way is that, she sees the image of Peter Quint and then she sees his face in the window, though we know she's already seen a figure, but she didn't have a face for the figure. So that's, one of the points that works in favor of that. But definitely an attraction there. And I think another thing that Miss Gross says right in that same moment that Michael was quoting from, she calls the love that Miss Jessel experiences for him a sickness, a fever that leaves the body burned out and dried, which I think is also, symptomatic of what we see happening in this other kind of possession, which is a romantic and a sexual possession that the governess is experiencing.
Yeah, and I think there's some visual piece in the way she dresses. By the end, she is dressing all in black like Miss Jessel. Yeah. She started out having colorful ones and white blouses and more frilly, and it becomes, that she looks like her at the end and dresses like her.
Yeah, she looks like her, and also the classic governess figure. She becomes the fearful image of the Gothic governess.
Yeah, and I think she probably specifically latches on to Quint and Jessel because there's something wrong in her mind, at least. There's something rotten in Denmark, and then the more Miss Gross tells her about them, she's like, oh, well, there it is. I have something to latch on to now. And again, so it lets you still play I don't know. Is that legit then, or is she just grasping at straws so she has something to kind of fix her mind on so she doesn't feel crazy? And then it allows her, again, to keep moving along with this fantasy of Miles. The fact that he is just so articulate as a kid, he treats her, he calls her dear, he treats her like a friend more, as an adult rather than as a kid. But it also is a relationship that she has some authority and power, which I doubt she's had in any relationship in her whole life up to this point, so it gets to this feeling, and in her head, maybe she's connecting it to this past adult of Quint, but it's all twisted up in the body of a kid.
We've talked mostly about the relationship between Miss Giddens and Miles, but there's also that incredible scene at the gazebo looking out over the reeds where she is insisting that Flora is seeing the ghost of Miss Jessel and refusing to admit it, and is just so like intense on her confessing in the same way that she does later with Miles. That scene is one that has always struck me from the first time I watched it, because it doesn't do what you think it's going to do. And they do it earlier with her sitting, the ghost of Miss Jessel at the desk, is that by the time we pan over the desk, the ghost is gone. But in the reads, we see the ghost, we pan away, we see the ghost, and the ghost stays there. It's real in a way that we rarely see in a horror movie. Usually, especially when we're talking about, did I see it? Did I not see it? That's one of the most memorable moments for me, is that it plays against the horror convention and further kind of like cements that this thing is real and that we must root it out eventually.
That moment also has like kind of the inversion where Miss Giddens is the one who's haunting that scene. She's lurking in the bushes outside of the gazebo, like watching Flora, in the same way that she imagines that Jessel and Quint are haunting her and haunting the children. But she's really the dark figure in the reads, like in some way. She's the more proximate lurker.
That scene is one from the first time I saw it, and still to watching it today, just gives me the chills every time when it pans out, especially when it's pouring rain and she's just standing there not moving. And yeah, that scene just gets me. And then it just gets heightened and heightened by Flora's reactions.
Well, and I think it speaks to the skill of Freddie Francis, our cinematographer, because yes, for all the sets, the lighting is controlled, but even an outdoor shot like that is so striking and so well represented visually. So I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of the look of the film, the cinematography. We have kind of the fades, where overlapping images. There's a lot of psychology involved there. What are some favorite moments or some favorite visuals that pop up for you?
The initial meeting between Flora and Miss Giddens, when Miss Giddens gets out of the carriage and we're introduced to Bly, they're kind of on this bridge between, there's reflective water on either side and they're mirroring each other. And that just always makes me want to, pause. It's like, yeah, the water, the mirror, the windows, the way that light bounces. And, initially that seeing of Quint is like, there's sun, what is possibly Quint, there's sun and it has a dizzying kind of effect. That contrast that comes, even the night, is sort of is really lit and luminous. I mean, the candelabra scene is one that I'm visually obsessed with and kind of, return to often.
If you played the movie, even during the opening credits, I would even argue, because there's even striking imagery in that. You could push play on the movie, and then you could just pause it at any moment, pick it out, get a print of it, blow it up, put it on your wall. That's how gorgeous this movie is. But in terms of like the images that struck me the most, we were talking about seeing the ghost out in the field and everything. It made me think of the movie Onibaba with the big brush that's just pounding in through the wind and like some of the rainfall even. And just also to the shots where Mrs. Giddens is going through the house by herself, and the house is laughing, and the shadows coming up the walls. It looks like she's walking within a void and fragments of a house at times. It's just so gorgeous and so just haunting and terrifying at the same time.
I think I've talked, about a lot of some of my favorite visual techniques, like in terms of the angelic halo lighting and the proto split diopter, like deep focus with two figures sort of variously in focus in ways that kind of make us think about like who can we trust, and characters being at odds with one another and like trading places. And like superimposition. And I think, that's one of the things that the frequent dissolves are doing, or like thinking about also, what Kate's been talking about, like the way that the past is really what's possessing them in some ways. Like the after image of all of these events is kind of what we're seeing play out. So I think the kind of use of dissolves in that way is really thematically relevant. Something else in terms of the lighting, I think I've talked about like some of my most specific images, but the way that the lighting, when it's not doing that, bright spotlight, it's playing in like shadow and light in a way that like casts everything in shades of gray. So there's sort of this like striping that happens between like, a line of shadow, a line of light, a line of shadow, a line of light, like across everybody's faces at other times in the movie when they're not in that spotlight. And I just think it's like visually all of the cinematography techniques are like working in tandem with the image in a way that I'm like, this is, perfect for like a film 101, like textual analysis class, because there's so much there in terms of interpreting the meanings that these visual techniques are representing.
My partner, Scott David Ryerson, actually interviewed Freddie Francis years ago, where Scott asks Freddie, how did you develop the special ghostly look of the film? And Freddie responded, I think that director Jack Clayton would prefer you to call it a supernatural film. We're coming out of the 50s where there was every effort to pull audiences away from their television sets. So the CinemaScope process had been developed and actually copyrighted, and 20th Century Fox imposed that on their productions. Initially, Clayton and Francis, at least Clayton, was concerned because he was trying to get across the utter claustrophobia of the setting. Francis developed a whole bunch of tricks to make that all work. He actually had hand-painted filters where the edges of the frames were actually painted so that it would create a tunnel of light. So that it did still have, you still had the CinemaScope, but when it was needed, you did have that narrow tunnel of light. Also, to go back to what Nicola said about the candles, those candles that were used specifically were special candles that were developed with 4 wicks in each candle so that they would throw enough light to be able to light the scene. But to go to one of my favorite scenes in the movie, I mean, it's one of the great moments in horror film history, is Peter Quint's appearance at the window. Again, Peter Wingard, no makeup, no special, he is a special effect. That satyr's face. And, in James's novel, the governess describes it as that white, damnable face. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the first person that has said this, but every time I see that scene, I'm like, Mario Bava, you're on the little dolly and you're being wheeled towards the window. That's been reused by Bava so many times. And when I did my research for the films that Bava used it on, they're all after this film. So I'm not saying this is where Bava got the idea, but it is precisely what Bava did again and again and again and again in the 60s and into even Lisa and the Devil in the 70s. It's that same use of, and even other filmmakers, Castle of Blood, at the end of Castle of Blood with Barbara Steele, and all the spectral figures come out. They were all coming in, and that's how they achieved it with Peter Wingard. They had a small dolly that they wheeled him towards the glass. And then I think it looks like he stepped back. But he is absolutely on a dolly to glide him back. In the most beautiful moment of that scene, he retreats from the window. And as he's retreating into darkness, all that's left are 2 tiny pin lights of light in his pupils until it goes to complete darkness. So that's one of my absolute favorite moments in the film.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that with the cinescope as well. That they didn't want to, and Freddie Francis figured it out. They also said he, kind of, I don't know what phrase he used, but like he would light the hell out of it. and that they had like just enormous banks of lights. And someone talked about how like Deborah Kerr like was never complained, but wearing those gowns and just being like under these like Klieg lights where you're just probably sweating like a pig and having to act different ways when you're super uncomfortable. And I really love a lot of the close-ups on Deborah Kerr's face. Someone else talked about it earlier, like that's so much of her performances in the eyes, and those close-ups of her face are lit so well, and work just perfectly for what they're supposed to be doing. Love the candle scene, and also that so much of the soundtrack to this movie is ambient noise. There's not a lot of music beyond the Oh Willy Wally song throughout it. There's a lot of bird noises and bug noises and animal noises, and even when they're inside the house, sometimes like seem to ramp up the volume of those with the suspense. So I thought that was really cool as well, the sound design.
I believe that she's uncredited in the film, but maybe somebody knows a bit more about this than I do. I really like electronic music, and I was like, there's something synthy happening, who is responsible for this. And Daphne Blake Oram, apparently uncredited, I think, in the film, was like one of the first, I think, I just did a little tiny bit of research, and I would love to return to this at a different time, but just like a pioneer of a technique for graphical sound, and like was one of the first, maybe the first woman to independently direct and set up a personal electronic music studio, which is just a quote from her Wikipedia page. But I just thought that was really cool. So I was not sure if anybody just knew a lot about her. But
there's a fantastic, it's about 2 hours long. There's a wonderful YouTube compilation of her work. Everything from clothes detergent commercials where she created the bubble sounds and to serious music, to music she did with children. But you're right. I mean, she was an absolute pioneer. And Clayton was not happy with the French composer Georges Auric, who had done the music for the film and actually pulled back on that. And they brought in that electronic composer to add that unsettled quality to different scenes. So you're absolutely right. And she was an absolute pioneer. This is around the time with Wendy Carlos started experimenting with this. Back then, when you recorded a synthesized noise, you were literally recording one single tone at a time. And each tone had to be edited together.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely remarkable.
Well, we talked about the sound design, and I mean the moaning and the crying, like all of these little aspects. I agree. There's not a lot of, we have birds chirping, like all of that kind of provides this sense of unnerving quiet. Like this doesn't feel like a movie at those moments. It feels like, well, what's happening right now? It feels like we should have music and we don't. I think that's one of the brave things that Jack Clayton does, is not treat this like a horror movie. It feels like a ghost story, and I feel like that's a different thing. I do want to just zip back really quick to the novella, because this is presented in the novella as the telling of a ghost story. The narrator has a friend who is then reading the letters of Miss Giddens or the governess, which also somebody brought up in my reading, that the person who ends up telling her story, she was his governess. How did she get another job after, one of her kids like dies mysteriously in her presence? I was like, I don't think I'd be hiring Miss Giddens anytime soon.
It was 1860. You moved to the other side of the country and no one knows.
She wasn't on LinkedIn. She wasn't.
That's right. That's right.
What were background checks like back then?
Any other fun trivia people want to bring up?
The are they dead or in limbo theory. Just a few things if you want to go back and look at it from a different lens. A couple of scenes or quotes that happen. So when Miss Giddens first arrives and she touches the flowers and all the petals fall off and she's like, oh, I'm sorry. Mrs. Gross basically is like, that's always happening. And I'm like, what, death? Like, yeah, death is all around us all the time. The first time Flora prays, she makes a mistake and says, "If I wake," instead of "if I die before I wake." Like, oops, like, I mean, if I wake before I think Mrs. Gross says nothing ever changes here. And there's kind of little things like that throughout that can kind of give you this sense that maybe that, and then the uncle is kind of that unreachable God. Like, he's there. He's the one who kind of pulls the strings, but you can't reach him. He's not available. You're in limbo and he's off somewhere else. So I just thought it was kind of a little fun thing. I don't know that I buy it, but it's buyable.
In that scene, Flora also says, if I'm good, I'll go to heaven. If I'm bad, I'll stay here. Like, I'll be stuck here. Which I think, that's one of the more compelling pieces in favor of, like, she knows that her, like, previous caretaker is still around, because she was, a very bad girl. But I think that another thing in tandem with that idea of, like, nothing ever changing, and Miles also says, he doesn't want anything to change. Part of that is, like, the question that Michael's brought up of, like, what is to be the fate of these children, but there's, like, the very like, music box doll thing motif that's happening too, also with, that the shot, which I should have said was one of my favorite shots, of Flora dancing in the gazebo while the music box version of the theme plays, because, like, we see then, diegetically the music box is actually where she's getting this music from, but she's the doll. And similarly, I mean, I have to talk about dolls, like, a little bit.
Thank you. I would have been so disappointed.
Yeah, just here at the end. But there's also the scene where Miss Giddens returns to her room and she shuts the door, and she's I think maybe just seen something. I can't remember exactly where this falls chronologically, but she sees that the window's open. She looks in her bed expecting to find Flora there, and finds a doll, and then finds Flora at the window. So I think that there's also that kind of, like, doll. I mean, there's the, like, uncanniness of the doll and of these children who act like adults. Like, that's, we talked about it before as, like, eerie, but that's also kind of like a classic, like, uncanny mismatch. But then that, like, kind of level of substitution where, is the doll a figure of evil or a figure of innocence? And also the kind of, like, sexualization or, like, fetishization that comes hand in hand with that freezing of the human form. Thinking about the, like, limbo hypothesis also kind of makes me think about the, like, dollhouse, enclosed nature of what's happening here.
Yeah, and this has nothing to do with me being in lust with Peter Wingard, so get that out of me. And I don't have an agenda.
I hadn't noticed.
And I don't have a gay agenda, but I think it would be irresponsible not to at least touch upon the fact that we have this through line of James being, fairly accepted now as a very closeted gay man. That I don't know about Archibald, but going through to Benjamin Britten, his 40-year partner was the singer, operatic singer, Peter Pears, who originated the role of Quint. If you listen to that opera, the most rhapsodic moments in that opera are Peter Quint singing to Miles. And then we move on to Truman Capote writing largely the script. So it's not hard to take that leap that there's an absolute and undeniable gay subtext to this whole thing. Historically, in terms of trivia, on a very serious level, in some regard, this is 1961. England still coming out of the war. This is a new period. And Eden, as had been mentioned earlier, has been destroyed. There was all that questioning going on about society and culture. In some ways, I think that this can be viewed as a retrograde approach because there is that long-held prejudice that gay people are perverts that are going to corrupt children, which is very unfortunate. Luckily, we're hopefully more enlightened now. But I think historically, what's very interesting to point out is that this film is 61. This is the same year that the British film Victim came out, starring Dirk Bogarde, who was coming off of a whole string of, and Dirk later in his career made not too many bones about his identity, as far as I know, and he was coming off a whole string of 50s light doctors comedies that were very romantic, and he was always a romantic heterosexual leading man. And this film is a explosion, because the film of Victim is about a closeted lawyer who is in a happily married relationship. He's very high powered, and he becomes the target of a blackmailing ring who are targeting closeted gay men and extorting money from them. And the whole point of this film is that Dirk Bogarde's character comes to terms with this and says, I'm not going to take this anymore. And he publicly risks his marriage, his career, his public standing to stand up against this. So the fact that these two movies came out in the same year showed something I think very interesting, that we were now starting to question in the realm of popular cinema these extremely controversial topics. I just happened to watch Victim because I'd always wanted to see it about 2 weeks ago, and I went, oh my God, this is 61.
I had not put those in the same universe, so.
Just quickly, in tandem with what Michael was saying, not only do we know this kind of about James's identity, but 3 years prior to The Turn of the Screw coming out, Oscar Wilde is, tried, and in 1885, it's the Criminal Law Amendment Act, which is the criminalization of homosexual relationships. So I think it is present in the source text, not just because of James's identity, but because of what was going on. And I think the anxiety, I think that the way that we're meant to read it is not necessarily, even in the film, a condemnation of the behaviors, but the condemnation of these secrets and these locked rooms, and what the cost is by what we might imagine the worst if we don't if we don't confront what's true, and if we don't get to act on our desires or have a place to go that is beyond this purgatory.
And the British laws didn't change until 67. So when Dirk Bogarde made that movie, homosexuality was illegal.
Right.
But no, I felt
it's so there.
It's so there.
Nicola?
Oh, I was just gonna add in a little more fuel to the gay fire, but just talking about that also literally textually in the film version, there is the whole question of the very close relationship between Quint and Miles, where Miss Gross is talking about how Miles idolized him and was always following him around. And then the very sexual and romantic poem it's also eerie, but he's calling to his lord in the window to come to him after we've just seen Peter Quint in the window. And it feels incredibly erotically charged that he's asking, for his lord to come to him. He's calling to Quint from his grave.
Just a little piece of trivia in The Ring, the American version of Ringu, on the haunted videotape, about 25 seconds in, you can hear some faint children or child singing. It's from this movie.
Oh, no way. We were laughing backstage that if we had chosen to discuss all of the adaptations of Turn of the Screw, we would be here for, a couple of weeks. And one of the films that I went and revisited in anticipation of this is the 1972 film, The Nightcomers, which is posed as a prequel to Turn of the Screw. It has Marlon Brando and Stephanie Beacham in it. And it definitely makes literal what we have perhaps imagined. It's much more explicit on almost every single level. And I don't know that it's necessarily successful or helpful for fans of Turn of the Screw, but I think it is an interesting movie. Michael, I know you've seen it, so just maybe some brief thoughts on it. Anybody else?
my dears, I took two for the team on this one. I watched Nightcomers and I watched The Haunting of Bly Manor. And I don't know, Dr. AC, maybe you're referring to the fact that it makes what was inferred explicit when you've got Stephanie Beacham literally hog-tied on the bedroom floor and then the kids reenacting it. So yeah, that was painful, as was Marlon Brando's Irish accent. I agree. Don't go there. The Haunting of Bly Manor, oh my God.
Do we have people who've seen A Haunting of Bly Manor that would like to opine? So you saw Hill House, but did you see Bly Manor as well?
No.
Okay.
What's interesting about Bly Manor is, I'm going to make one little quick comment about it. What I found very interesting about Bly Manor is that, and we're not going to go into this, there is a specific haunting in England that apparently influenced, or James claimed influenced, his ghost story.
Okay.
And when I did the research on that, I think it's called Himpner, whatever the name of the house is. It seems to me that the writers for Bly Manor based more of the haunting in that series on that supposed true haunting than they did on anything to do with Henry James.
Well, they had to flesh it out for 9 hours. So, I made it through 2 episodes. I just said, you know what, this is not for me. And we've got The Innocents. So I'm going to go watch The Innocents again. Anyway, circling back around, let's talk about our final thoughts. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. This went in directions I didn't think it was going to go, which is always fun. Tyler, go ahead and kick us off.
I had such a blast listening to all 5 of you talk about this incredible movie. I'm just going to keep watching this movie forever. I'm probably going to wear this disc out. My roommate's got another disc here because I accidentally bought 2, but it's like, let's just keep them here. I'm going to keep coming back to this, and also in large part because of this conversation we had, just like all the things that had not occurred to me on my previous viewings of the Innocents. So I'm excited to revisit it again. Thank you all, and thank you for having me on for this. I love this film.
Thank you, Tyler. Michael.
And I'll echo that, Tyler. It was an honor to explore this film. It has so much personal significance to me, not only in terms of the filmmaking involved and the performances, but what it achieves, what it truly achieves. Just a moment for a very guilty, no pleasure is guilty, but if you want to have some fun and you're not familiar with it, of all the different versions that I suffered through, to see as many adaptations as I could. The one that I still recommend, other than The Innocents, is the 1992 version starring the British actress-singer Patsy Kensit. You also have Julian Sands as the uncle. The children are fairly hideous, but it is such fun and so over the top and psychedelic and wild. It's a pleasure. I would recommend the 1992 version. This is truly a perfect film. There is really nothing wanting, or where I would watch it and say, well, if they don't, everything works perfectly. It achieves its intentions and exceeds them. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Kate.
Yeah, as a sort of student and lover of the Gothic and its, legacy and speculative fiction, I love to stay in is this real or is it not world forever in this beautiful and scintillating gray striped dark and light zone. And this film is so beautiful and so devastating for its implications. Bly Manor forever, where nothing changes.
Mark.
I'll do the old man shouting at the cloud. You youngsters who don't like to watch black and white movies, I say give this one a try. Try out something that's old and black and white. Do this one because there's so much about it that feels contemporary. Even a lot of the camera stuff, because of I think how influential it was. You can still see like that some of these techniques feel like they're modern. So like just give it a try. I think you'll like it.
Thank you, Mark. Nicola.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure to like, I don't know, try to sum something up out of this film, and all the different directions that we've talked through. Yeah, echoing everybody's thanks. This was an incredible conversation. I think something, just to I love to like open it, further outwards at the end, but I think something we didn't talk as much about is like, the kind of specter of like expectations of white femininity that also like haunt the screen. And I think, part of what the like angelic light is doing is like, making whiteness more white, and like blondness more blonde. And so I think that like, part of the sexual repression subtext is that, white women in particular are like positioned in this time period, and to this day, as the expectation is to be the like kind of moral compass, and to uphold morality, and to be desirable but not desiring. I think that that's a lot, like that's the entire character here. Part of her relationship with Flora is also like instructing her in the sort of like proper way to be a white woman. And like, hand in hand with that are the class and the like specter of colonialism, where she's able to project her desires onto, even though she's also like working class, she's, the son of a like religious man, and she's educated, and she's able to project her desires onto the working class people while elevating the children to the status of ultimate innocence, and then also denigrating them at the same time. So I think it also, implicates whiteness in the kind of corruption that's happening here.
Those are your final thoughts? Are you sure?
For now.
Oh man, now I have to go watch this movie again, which is going to be a pleasure. Thank you all so much. I have so much more appreciation for this movie that I already held in such incredible regard. And I enjoyed this conversation so much. I really thought this was going to be a shorter conversation, and to my delight, things just kept spiraling out and out and out. And I am so thankful. So looking forward to having you all on again very soon to chat about some other masterpiece. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.